I have always been proud of my home. It is not a big mansion or luxury house, but it feels safe. The place where my wife, Sophia, and I built our lives together. Every wall, every corner is filled with memories. But that changed completely in just one evening. That evening, I was driving home from a week-long business trip. Work at the company was getting more stressful, and I tried to finish early so I could have more time to relax on the weekend. On the way home, my phone vibrated, signaling a new text message. As I stopped at a red light, I glanced at the screen. It was from an unknown number. Be careful what's going on in your house. Check the basement. I blinked, trying to process the brief message. It was probably just a silly joke from someone I didn't know. But why the basement? Sophia had recently hired someone to renovate the house, and the basement, which was just a storage space, wasn't anything special. Still, the message made me uneasy. As I turned onto the street leading home, the familiar feeling should have been comforting, but this time it was different. The streetlights flickered, the shadows of the trees covering the road created strange patches of light and shadow. I stopped in front of the gate, noticed that the lights were still on inside the house, but no one was passing by as usual. Not even Sophia's car was in sight. I walked into the house and immediately knew something was wrong. The house was completely silent. There was no music Sophia would play when she was home, no familiar smells of food coming from the kitchen. The unnatural silence made the air heavy, as if the whole house was keeping a secret. I put down my bag and called out, "Sophia, where are you?" There was no answer. I walked into the living room, my eyes quickly scanning everything. The room was still neat, no sign of clutter, but something was wrong. It felt like someone had just left, leaving a faint trace. The sofa was slightly out of place, and there was a half-drunk glass of wine on the table, but it wasn't the kind of wine that Sophia or I would normally drink. I turned back to the hallway, and that's when I noticed the dim light coming from the crack in the basement door. The basement door was ajar, which was completely unusual. The basement was where we usually stored our old stuff, and none of us had any reason to be there. My breathing became heavier, and my heart was beating uncontrollably. I moved closer, feeling the cold air around the door creeping into my skin. A flurry of thoughts raced through my head. Was someone in my house? Had Sophia just left the light on? But where was Sophia? My hand was on the doorknob, trying to stay calm. I pushed the door open, and the light from the basement fell on my face, inviting and warning at the same time. I stopped. No, I couldn't act hastily. Taking a few steps back, I quickly went into the study, opened a drawer, and took out the small pistol I kept for protection. Clutching the gun, I returned to the basement, more prepared this time. I listened, and for the first time, I heard a sound. A low, broken laugh, accompanied by indistinct whispers. My scalp prickled. It felt like I was entering a nightmare. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the whispers turn into louder noises, heavy footsteps, the sound of something being dragged across the floor. Finally, I decided not to go down right away. I stepped back slightly, finding a hiding place near the stairs to watch. The basement door suddenly opened, and a figure stepped out. I held my breath. A tall man in a disheveled shirt, a glass of wine in his hand, ambled up the steps as if this were his home. He was followed by another laugh, a woman's voice, frighteningly familiar. "Sophia." My throat felt tight. I wanted to rush out, to scream, but my legs felt frozen. Sophia walked up the stairs, her movements light as if nothing had happened. She held a glass of wine, and as she walked, she said something to the man, her voice full of intimacy. They walked past me without even noticing my presence. I hid behind the corner, feeling my heart stop. The pieces began to come together in my mind. The basement, the construction crew, the dim light, and now this scene. I knew something terrible was happening in my own house. I stood there, angry, but also determined. I knew what I had to do, but to act, I needed to understand the whole truth. And that started in the basement. I walked silently down the stairs, still clutching the gun. The laughter continued below, unintentionally pushing my anger to the breaking point. As I descended the basement stairs that evening, everything seemed to stand still. I felt like I was getting to the heart of a dark secret that Sophia had tried to keep hidden. But before I could uncover the terrible truth, I needed to unravel other clues. And that's when it all began to unravel. From the day Sophia told me about her plans to renovate the house. It was about 2 months ago. It was a normal afternoon. I had just finished renovating my parents' house, a big project that I'd been working on for weeks. Sophia had just settled into the sofa to rest when she walked into the living room with a strange, excited smile. Ethan, I have a great idea, she said, sitting down next to me and placing her hand on my shoulder. I sighed, still exhausted from the exhausting days of work. What is it, Sophia? We need to change our living space. I've been thinking about renovating the house, updating everything to make it more comfortable, she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. I raised an eyebrow at her. What do you mean, refresh? We just repainted the house 2 years ago, and everything is fine. Sophia shook her head, disagreeing. No, no, I'm not just talking about painting the walls. I want a complete makeover. The basement, the living room, and even the bedrooms. I've contacted Mark. He's my friend's husband, and he's an expert in this field. He'll be coming to see us next week to discuss the details. I sat up, frowning. Mark? Your friend's husband? The one you said does big projects? Sophia, do you know how expensive it is to renovate a house? I just finished renovating my parents' house. Do you think you can afford to start a new project? Sophia shrugged, her smile never fading. Don't worry about the cost. Mark is very talented, and I'm sure he'll help us out at a reasonable price. I want this house to be more than ideal, not just for you, but for both of us. I wanted to object, but looking at her determined eyes, I suddenly felt that I couldn't argue back. Perhaps Sophia just wanted to do something good for both of us, and I, as a husband, should support her. I reluctantly nodded. Okay, do whatever you want, but I don't want to get too involved. My job is tiring enough, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Sophia smiled brightly, hugging me. Thank you, Ethan. You won't regret it. But in fact, I was wrong. In the weeks that followed, things spiraled out of my control. In the following days, my house gradually turned into a construction site. The sound of hammers and drills echoed from morning until late at night, making it almost impossible for me to concentrate on my work. But what bothered me most was not the noise. It was the way Sophia had behaved since the renovations began. At first, I tried not to pay too much attention. Sophia often told me that she wanted everything to be perfect, and I respected that. But then there were little signs that made me start to doubt. The construction crew, led by Mark, for example, always seemed too relaxed. They often stayed later than necessary, sometimes late into the evening, even though the job did not require overtime. Once, when I asked Sophia why they needed so much time, she just laughed and said, Mark said it's better to be thorough. He wants to make sure every detail is perfect. This sounded reasonable, but somehow I still felt uncomfortable, not just because of their hours, but also because of their attitude. Mark was a tall, elegant man, but there was something about him that made me uncomfortable, an overly confident look in his eyes, and a half smile that made me feel like he knew something I didn't. The men in his group were different. They were young, muscular men who joked loudly and made insensitive comments. Once I caught one of them giving Sophia a look that I could only describe as inappropriate. I walked straight forward, my voice firm. Hey, please focus on your work. The young man was startled, scratched his head and smiled awkwardly. Sorry, boss, it's just, your wife is very beautiful. That statement made my blood boil, but I held it in. I turned to Sophia, waiting for her to speak, but instead she just shrugged and avoided my eyes. This wasn't the Sophia I knew. She was usually sensitive to my emotions, but now she seemed unconcerned. I told myself that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe the stress of work and the noise of construction were making me lose my temper. But then, other strange things started to happen. Late one night, I returned home after working overtime. The lights in the house were off, but the construction team's car was still parked in front of the door. The main door was locked, but the basement was lit. I entered the house feeling strange. I was about to go down to the basement to check, but as my hand touched the doorknob, I heard laughter. Sophia's voice mixed with Mark's laughter. I stood there for a few seconds, my mind racing. What were they doing at this hour? And why was she the only one there with Mark? I started to open the door, but then stopped. If I barged in without knowing what was going on, I could make things worse. I quietly walked up to my bedroom, but that night I couldn't sleep. The laughter and strange noises from the basement kept echoing in my head. The next morning, I tried to ask Sophia, "What were you doing in the basement last night? I saw the construction team's car stay quite late." She paused for a moment, then replied quickly, "Mark needs my help with some design details. I don't want to bother you, so I'll take care of it." I stared at her, trying to find something in her eyes, but she just calmly drank her coffee and continued scrolling through her phone. The climax of my suspicions came when my neighbor, Linda, came to see me one afternoon. Linda was an older woman who was always observing things around her and was not afraid to share her opinions. "Ethan, I don't mean to interfere in your family matters, but I think you should know this," she said, her voice a whisper. I found that construction crew unusual. Not only did they work, they also stayed overnight. Sometimes I even heard music and laughter coming from the basement. I don't want to judge, but I think you should pay attention. My heart sank. The pieces began to come together, forming a picture I didn't want to believe. The basement, the construction team, Sophia's attitude, none of it was right. I thanked Linda and returned home, filled with doubt. But this time, I decided not to ask Sophia. I knew I had to find out the truth myself. Since my conversation with Linda, my sense of unease has grown. Things that I had previously dismissed as unimportant details have now become strange pieces of a puzzle, forming a picture full of suspicion. Every morning when I left for work, the construction crew showed up early, ready to get to work. At first, this impressed me. They looked professional and hardworking, but over time, that hard work became something that annoyed me. Not only did they work, but they seemed to move freely around the house as if it were their own. One time, when I came home at noon, which was rare, I found one of the construction workers rummaging through a drawer in the kitchen. When I entered, he jumped, clutching a small knife in his hand. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep calm. He smiled wryly, put down the knife, and muttered something unclear. "I was just looking for a tool to peel some fruit." The explanation didn't make sense, but I didn't want to cause trouble. I nodded and let him go. But from then on, I started paying more attention to how the construction team behaved. I noticed that Mark, the team leader, always found a way to talk to Sophia, even when work didn't require it. They would stand close together, whispering about blueprints I never got to see. Sometimes I would catch Sophia laughing, her eyes twinkling as she looked at Mark, and it made my stomach churn. One evening, as we were standing in the living room talking, I walked in and asked, "What is it that you two are taking so long to discuss?" Mark smiled politely and replied in a calm tone, "We were talking about the basement, Ethan. Your wife has very creative ideas. She wants to make it a very special space." "The basement?" I repeated, my unease rising. "What, specifically?" Sophia quickly chimed in, "Don't worry, Ethan. I wanted to create a space where we can both relax, away from the pressures of work. You'll love it when it's done." I kept quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being left out of these plans. The basement light was often on at night, even though Sophia said no one was there. One day, when I checked the basement during the day, I noticed a number of items that did not belong to us: a leather jacket, several expensive bottles of wine, and strange electrical cords. I brought this up to Sophia, but she just smiled and said, "Don't be so nervous, Ethan. It's just the workman's stuff." I told them to clean up better. I nodded, but I didn't feel reassured. My sense of unease continued to grow, and subsequent events only reinforced my belief that something was going on behind my back. Sophia began spending more and more time with Mark and the crew than I did. She stopped sharing with me what was going on in the house that I still considered my home. One day, I came home earlier than usual. This time, it wasn't just a check, but to confirm the suspicions that had been haunting me. As I entered the house, I immediately noticed that the basement door was slightly ajar. I crept down the stairs, keeping my steps as light as possible. In the dim light, the basement looked like a construction site, but something was different. The boxes of our old stuff had been cleared away. In their place were plush sofas covered with tarps, a row of ceiling lights, and appliances whose purpose I couldn't figure out. In the corner of the room, I saw a small refrigerator. Next to it were a few bottles of expensive wine and a box of cigarettes that I knew for sure did not belong to Sophia or me. Along with these unfamiliar objects, I also discovered a sketch on Mark's desk. It depicted a completely different basement than Sophia had described. Instead of a simple relaxing space, the sketch contained a large bed, color changing lighting, and an area marked special. I picked up the blueprint, anger rising inside me. This wasn't what we discussed. This wasn't the house I wanted. I considered asking Sophia right away, but then stopped. If she was really hiding something from me, confronting her directly now would only make her defensive. I decided to keep quiet and continue observing. A few days later, my kind neighbor, Mrs. Linda, came to see me again. This time, she brought a worried look. "Ethan," she began, her voice low but urgent, "I think you need to know something." I looked at her, a feeling of unease filling me. "What is it, Linda?" "Last night, I saw some of your construction crew leave the house around midnight, but not from the front door. They came out of the basement door, and I saw them carrying something. I'm not sure what it was, but it looked suspicious." I frowned. "Bring something? Are you sure? I can't see clearly, but it's big and covered with a cloth. I just thought you should pay attention. Something's not right here, Ethan." Linda's words were a direct blow to the doubts I had been trying to suppress. I thanked her, then turned and headed home, filled with determination. I started to pay more attention to Sophia. She had always been outgoing and open, but now she became more secretive. Her phone, which was usually on the table, was now always kept by her side. She texted more, sometimes giggling like a girl in love. One evening, while she was in the shower, I decided to check her phone. I knew it was wrong, but I needed answers. I opened my phone and found no messages from Mark, but there was another messaging app I had never seen before. Even though it was password protected, the icon alone made me suspicious. Sophia was hiding something. That much was certain. I tried not to show my emotions, but the abnormality in the house became more and more obvious. The basement was now where Sophia spent most of her time. Once, when I asked her, "Why do you stay in the basement so much? Is there something special there that I don't know about?" she smiled, but it wasn't as innocent as before. "I just want to make sure everything is done the way I want it. Don't worry. When it's done, you'll be surprised." I nodded, but the feeling in my heart was not one of anticipation, but of an unnameable fear. The feeling of being stuck in the house seemed to haunt me every day. All the signs pointed in one direction, and all I needed was the final piece of evidence to expose the truth. I decided I wouldn't wait any longer. That night, when Sophia announced that she was going out to meet friends and might be home late, I knew this was my only chance to act. After making sure she had left the house, I headed down to the basement. Without any reserve, I threw open the door and turned on the light. The room that appeared before me was completely different from the image I knew. The old boxes and carpentry tools were completely gone, replaced by a strange arrangement of space, both sophisticated and suspicious. The walls were covered in soundproofing material, which seemed to drown out all sound. The light from the small recessed lights cast a dim atmosphere. In the middle of the room was a large black leather sofa, which looked expensive at first glance. Red curtains hung around it, as if to hide something behind it. In the corner of the room, a large wooden table was neatly placed. On it was a small camera, and some electronic devices whose functions I could not recognize. There was also a large mirror, tilted, reflecting the weak light from the bulbs. The cold and quiet air made my steps heavier. I walked over to the desk. The scattered papers on it immediately caught my attention. I picked one up, and my heart sank. It was a short contract, signed by Mark and Sophia. The contract specified the use of the basement for personal purposes, with many specifics that I didn't understand. But what confused me most was the last line. "The project cost will be paid in cash or other forms as agreed." I put the paper down, trying to calm myself. Next to it was a small notebook with a list of items that had been purchased for the basement. Sofa, lamps, cameras, wine. Everything was carefully noted down. I turned to the last page where a note was scribbled, "Check carefully before shooting. VIP customers require no errors." VIP customer? I feel like I'm in a nightmare. My eyes fell on the small camcorder sitting on the table. My hand shook as I turned it on and checked the video files. There were dozens of clips, each lasting 20 to 30 minutes, marked with the date. I picked the latest video. The basement looked exactly as I was seeing it now, but instead of being empty, it was full of people. Sophia sat on the sofa, a glass of wine in her hand, chatting happily with Mark and the construction crew. They were laughing, clapping, and then it went further than I could have ever imagined. My heart pounded. It all made sense now. Sophia, the person I once loved and trusted completely, had turned our home into a place of contempt. I felt like everything was falling apart. Anger welled up, but it couldn't overcome the pain deep inside me. I had hoped that my suspicions were wrong, that Sophia was just trying to do something unexpected to make me happy. But now, I couldn't deny the reality that was right in front of me. I took the camera, put it in my pocket, and turned to go up the stairs. Before leaving the basement, I stopped for a moment, looking down at the space that I no longer recognized. The basement that had once held our small memories had now become a symbol of betrayal. I went up to the living room and sat down on the chair, feeling angry and empty. Now, I knew what I had to do next. I sat in the darkness of the living room, thinking about what I had just seen. Anger welled up in me, but I knew I couldn't act rashly. This wasn't just a matter of emotion, it was about protecting my honor and my life. Sophia would be held accountable for everything she had done. A little over an hour later, Sophia returned. The sound of the door opening startled me from my thoughts. I watched her walk into the house, her face bright and relaxed, as if nothing had happened. "Ethan, I'm home," she called out, setting her bag down on the table. I didn't answer, just sat quietly in the dark corner. When Sophia saw me, she paused slightly. "What are you doing here? Why didn't you turn on the light?" she asked, her voice a little confused. I stood up and walked slowly towards her. "Sophia, is there anything you want to tell me?" She frowned, looking at me as if I'd asked something strange. "What did you say?" "No, I don't understand." I couldn't help it any longer. "The basement, Sophia. You think I'll never know what's going on in the basement?" Her expression changed instantly. She took a step back, her eyes wide, but she tried to keep her voice calm. "Ethan, what are you talking about? I don't understand." I took the camera from my bag and held it up to her face. "I saw everything. Stop pretending. You think I won't notice how you turned this house into something like that?" Sophia was silent, her eyes fixed on the camera. For a moment, I saw a hint of fear in her eyes, but it was immediately gone, replaced by a shameless, faint smile. "Ethan," she said, her voice frighteningly soft, "do you really think this matters? It's just a couple of friends having fun. You're making a big deal out of it." "A few friends?" I shouted, losing my temper. "You betrayed me. In our own home. In the basement I built. And you dare say this is a small matter?" Sophia crossed her arms, maintaining a defiant attitude. "Ethan, you are really old-fashioned. Maybe you don't understand, but sometimes people need a little freedom to escape boredom. Just because I want to do something new doesn't mean I don't love you." Her words were like a knife cutting into my heart. I looked at the woman in front of me, the one I once trusted more than anyone, and realized that she had completely changed. This was not the Sophia I once loved. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "Okay, Sophia, if this is how you see things, then I don't think we have anything more to say to each other. Tomorrow, pack your things and leave. I'll call a lawyer." She smirked, but that quickly turned to panic when she realized I wasn't joking. "Ethan, you can't do that. This is my house too." I pointed at the camera in my hand. "Sophia, I have all the evidence I need to prove that you no longer deserve this house. The contract, the video, and Linda's testimony, it's all against you. This house is in my name, and you're leaving empty-handed." Sophia glared at me, then began to beg. "Ethan, don't do this. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Let me make it right. Don't let it get this far." But I was too tired. All the love I had for her was gone. I looked at her one last time, my voice cold. "Sophia, you ruined everything. I have nothing more to say." The next morning, I woke up early as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window. The night before had been a storm of emotions, anger, pain, determination, but now, all my emotions had melted into a terrifying calm. I knew exactly what I had to do. This was no time to think or hesitate. Sophia was still asleep in bed, her face strangely peaceful, as if she had no idea that everything had changed forever. I stood by the edge of the bed for a moment, looking at her one last time before turning away. My love for her had been completely destroyed, not by fatigue or disagreement, but by betrayal and lies. I went down to the basement again, this time to clean up the evidence and prepare the files. The camera, the contracts, and the drawings. I carefully packed them all into a document bag. I wanted to protect myself, but also to make sure Sophia wouldn't have the opportunity to do this again anywhere else. Then I called my lawyer, Alex. He was an old friend, and I knew I could trust him. Alex, I need your help, I said briefly over the phone. Alex's voice immediately became serious. Ethan, what happened? You sound stressed. I briefly described what I had discovered in the basement, emphasizing the evidence I had gathered. Alex did not interrupt, just listened silently. Finally, he replied, You did the right thing by writing everything down. With what you have, this divorce will not only be quick, but also completely in your favor. Send me all the documents, and we'll begin immediately. I nodded, feeling a little relieved. This was the first step towards getting my life back. When I returned to the living room, Sophia was already awake. She was sitting on the sofa, holding a cup of coffee, looking calm as if everything was normal. But when she saw me, her eyes changed. Maybe she noticed something in my expression. Ethan, what are you doing? Why didn't you tell me this morning? I stood across from her, keeping my voice calm but firm. Sophia, today will be your last day in this house. I have contacted a lawyer and started divorce proceedings. You have until tonight to pack your things. Sophia was stunned, as if she couldn't believe her ears. What? Ethan, you're joking, right? We're husband and wife. You can't do this just because of a small misunderstanding. I looked straight at her, unwavering. Don't lie, Sophia. I saw it all. What you did in the basement, the contracts, the videos. Don't try to justify it. It will only make things worse. Sophia stood up abruptly, her voice becoming angry. Are you really going to ruin everything just for this? Ethan, you have to understand that I never wanted to hurt you. This is just a way to escape boredom. I cut her off, my voice low but sharp. Escape boredom? By betraying me? By turning our home into a place of despicable deeds? Sophia, this is not just betrayal. It is an insult. She opened her mouth to say something, but then fell silent. She knew there was no way to defend herself. I handed Sophia an empty suitcase and pointed to the stairs. Pack your things. This house is in my name. You have nothing left here. Sophia looked at me with hatred in her eyes. You will regret this, Ethan. You are destroying everything we had. I shook my head, feeling cold. No, Sophia. You destroyed it. I was only doing what was necessary to protect myself. I walked out, leaving her in the living room. I didn't want to see her cry or try to convince me anymore. I was tired of her lies. At night, Sophia dragged her suitcase out the door. She didn't say another word, just glanced at me one last time with angry eyes. As the door closed behind her, I felt like the whole house breathed a sigh of relief. Sophia's presence, the secrets she carried, and all the lies had left this house. I immediately changed the lock, then sat down on the chair with a feeling of emptiness. Not loneliness, but a feeling of liberation. When Sophia left the house suddenly became strangely quiet. But this silence was not loneliness. It was a sense of relief that I had not felt for months. I sat on the sofa, looked around the house, and thought about everything that had just happened. The love, the trust, the lies and betrayals. All of it was now in the past. Sophia used to be the person I trusted the most. I thought we could overcome any difficulties together, that she was the ideal partner. But now I realize that there are people who only exist in your life to teach you a lesson and then leave. The next morning, I contacted my attorney, Alex, to finalize the divorce papers. The evidence from the basement, video, contracts, and neighbor testimony was strong enough to ensure that I not only kept the house, but also avoided any financial liability related to Sophia. The divorce was quick and final. I didn't look at Sophia when I stood before the judge, and she didn't try to make eye contact with me. Perhaps she realized that any excuses or pleas were meaningless. The construction team was also investigated for breach of contract and misconduct. The police got involved after I provided evidence. After the hearing ended, Alex put his hand on my shoulder. Ethan, you did well. Sometimes, walking away from a toxic relationship is the only right thing to do. I nodded. Thank you, Alex. You're not only a good lawyer, but also a good friend. Back home, I began to do what I'd wanted to do for a long time: clean out everything that had anything to do with Sophia, from the photos we shared, to the furniture she had chosen, to the little things she had left behind. Everything was gathered up and put away. I wanted this house to be a fresh start, one that no longer reminded me of any of the pain of the past. The basement was where I spent the most time. I took down everything Sophia and Mark had installed: the expensive sofa, the chandeliers, and the quirky red curtains. I returned the basement to its original function, a simple place to store essentials. When I was done, I sat in the middle of the empty basement, feeling a strange sense of peace. Sometimes, clearing out your physical space is like clearing out your soul. Both are necessary to start over. After Sophia left, I spent more time taking care of myself. I started to pick up hobbies that I'd neglected because of work and marriage. I read books, went for morning runs, and even signed up for a pottery class. One afternoon, while jogging through the park, I stopped by a pond and looked at my reflection. It was no longer the tired, broken man I had been. I realized that despite the pain of loss, I had become stronger. Old friends, relationships that I had neglected, now became a great source of encouragement. They regularly invited me out to dinner, to the movies, and helped me remember that life was about more than a broken relationship. One day, while I was cleaning the backyard, I met Linda, my kind neighbor who had helped me a lot during my difficult time. She brought over a basket of baked goods and said, "Ethan, I'm glad to see you're back to yourself. The house looks a lot brighter too." I smiled, feeling warm inside. "Thank you, Linda. Your advice has helped me a lot. Without you, I don't know what I would do." Mrs. Linda smiled kindly. "You're a good boy, Ethan. Don't let anyone overshadow your worth. Just live like this, and happiness will find you." Her words made me think. Maybe happiness is not something far away. It lies right here, in the small and simple things that I've missed for so long. A few weeks later, I got a big project at work, an opportunity to prove myself in my career. Being busy helped me forget the bad memories and focus on what really mattered. I also started opening up to new people. At a small party that my coworkers threw, I met a woman named Claire. She wasn't the type of person who immediately struck a chord with me, but our conversation lasted longer than I'd expected. Claire had a sincerity and openness that I'd forgotten I needed in a relationship. We started seeing each other more often, and I realized that, despite the scars from the past, I was ready to try again. Life isn't always easy, and sometimes it throws you into situations you never expected. But I've learned that even in the darkest moments, there's always the opportunity to change and start over. Sophia was gone, but that wasn't the end. It was a new chapter in my life, one where I was free to be who I was, no longer bound by lies. Sitting in the house I had completely cleaned and renewed, I took a deep breath and felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was no longer just my house. This was my rebirth.